He was fired for being too old. His former bosses didn't know he was the true face behind their biggest competitor. The opulent Apex Innovations boardroom, usually a bastion of cutthroat deal-making and self-congratulatory pronouncements, buzzed with a different kind of energy that crisp autumn morning. Julian Thorne, the CEO, a man whose tailored suits barely concealed his inflated ego, leaned back in his ergonomic chair, a smirk playing on his lips. Across from him, Serafina Vance, the head of innovation, a woman whose every utterance was punctuated by buzzwords, nodded in agreement, her gaze sweeping over the polished mahogany table. Their attention, or rather, their dismissive amusement, was fixed on a lone figure at the far end, Arthur, the recently appointed senior systems architect, a man whose quiet demeanor and slightly old-fashioned spectacles seemed entirely out of place amidst Apex's gleaming modernity. "So, Arthur," Julian began, his voice dripping with condescension, "we've just finalized the acquisition terms. A truly remarkable feat, wouldn't you agree, Serafina? Zenith Tech, of all companies, stepping in to rescue Apex." He chuckled, a sound devoid of genuine mirth, a brittle, self-satisfied sound that grated on one's ears. "Funny, isn't it? Just a few weeks ago, you were telling us we needed to prioritize legacy system retirement and agile transformation. Well, Arthur, it seems our agility was precisely what saved us, not your, shall we say, more deliberate approach." The cutting edge of his words was meant to wound, to diminish, to assert a final, definitive victory in a battle Arthur had seemingly lost months ago. Serafina chimed in, her tone equally patronizing, her eyes gleaming with a practiced, superficial enthusiasm. "Indeed, Arthur. We're moving into a brave new world, one where digital fluency and youth-centric vision are paramount. No room for traditional methodologies, I'm afraid. This acquisition truly solidifies our future, ensuring Apex Innovations remains at the forefront of, well, everything." She punctuated her statement with a decisive nod, as if her words alone could manifest reality, could bend the very fabric of the corporate world to her will. A subtle glance passed between her and Julian, a shared moment of triumph over what they perceived as obsolescence. Arthur, or rather, Octavius, remained impassive. His silver hair, slightly disheveled in a way that suggested a comfortable detachment from vanity, framed a face that held the wisdom of decades, yet was currently devoid of any discernible emotion. The subtle lines around his eyes, the slight downturn of his lips, spoke of a lifetime of observation, of patience cultivated through countless trials. He took a slow sip from his lukewarm tea, his gaze moving from Julian to Serafina, then to the various board members who sat in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of relief and bewilderment at Apex's sudden lifeline. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his lips, a private amusement that was almost entirely missed by those around him. The game, he believed, was over. His voice, calm and surprisingly resonant in the hushed room, carried a weight that belied the simplicity of his words. Julian and Serafina exchanged a glance, then burst into laughter. It was a brittle, triumphant sound, utterly lacking in self-awareness, filled with the echo of their own perceived victory. "Over? Arthur, old man, it's just beginning." Julian scoffed, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye, leaning back further into his chair, radiating an obnoxious confidence. "You're just upset you won't be around to see it, aren't you? Honestly, the gall of some people. Even in your final moments with the company, you try to lecture us." His tone implied a dismissive pity, a final, condescending farewell. Serafina leaned forward, her voice a theatrical whisper, designed to be overheard, to amplify the public humiliation she intended. "Perhaps he's trying to imply he had something to do with this miraculous turnaround? Oh, Arthur, you're just too precious. He had been quite clear, your services are no longer required." His insights were, frankly, more of a hindrance than a help. They needed dynamism, not nostalgia. Her hand swept dismissively towards him, as if wiping away a dusty relic. The board members shifted uncomfortably, sensing the awkwardness but still oblivious to the monumental shift about to occur. They saw only Arthur, the unassuming, older man they had all quietly agreed was a relic, being put in his place one last time. They saw Julian and Serafina, the youthful, aggressive leaders who, despite their recent missteps, had apparently pulled Apex back from the brink. The irony of the situation, the profound, gut-wrenching irony, was still lost on them. Octavius merely set his teacup down, the soft clink echoing in the suddenly silent room. He met Julian's gaze, then Serafina's, his eyes holding a depth that belied his Arthur persona. The game was indeed over, but not in the way they imagined. For them, it was only just beginning. The path that led Octavius to assume the guise of Arthur and infiltrate Apex Innovations was a long and winding one, paved with both personal disillusionment and profound professional observation. He was, in his true identity, Octavius Thorne, a name whispered with reverence in the hallowed halls of Silicon Valley, a visionary whose early ventures had laid the groundwork for entire industries. His first company, Nexus Solutions, founded in a garage with little more than a dream and a single, flickering fluorescent bulb, had revolutionized data compression in the nascent days of the Internet, making streaming media a practical reality decades before its widespread adoption. He had built empires from nothing, not through aggressive takeovers or flashy marketing, but through sheer, unadulterated ingenuity and a deep-seated belief in the transformative power of technology when wielded responsibly. His philosophy had always been rooted in foundational principles: build it right, build it securely, build it to last. He had seen the cycles of boom and bust, the rise and fall of countless startups, and understood that true value lay not in the fleeting hype but in robust, scalable solutions. Yet, with each successive wave of innovation, Octavius had witnessed a disturbing trend. The industry, once driven by passion and genuine problem-solving, was increasingly consumed by fleeting trends, superficial metrics, and an alarming disregard for foundational principles. He saw companies chase the next disruptive buzzword, investing millions in unproven technologies while neglecting the very infrastructure that kept their operations afloat. Agile, once a practical methodology, had devolved into an excuse for chaotic development and a lack of foresight. Synergy and disruption became mantras, repeated mindlessly, devoid of actual meaning. Youth, once seen as a source of fresh ideas, had become an idol, worshipped blindly, often at the expense of experience and wisdom. Ageism, a quiet but pervasive malignancy, had begun to infect the very core of tech culture, labeling seasoned professionals as obsolete or not agile enough, quietly pushing them out in favor of younger, often less experienced, but more hip talent. He remembered a brilliant colleague, a database architect with 40 years of invaluable experience, summarily dismissed because the company wanted a younger, fresher perspective for a project that then spectacularly failed due to a lack of fundamental understanding. Octavius himself, despite his unparalleled success, had felt the subtle sting of this shift. He had seen his innovative ideas, born of years of practical application and deep understanding, dismissed by younger executives who preferred buzzwords over substance, quick wins over sustainable growth. He had encountered countless visionaries who could articulate a grand, abstract future but stumbled over the basic mechanics of how to build it. He had witnessed the rise of Julian Thorne and Serafina Vance, two ambitious individuals who embodied this new, ruthless paradigm. Julian, with his booming voice and penchant for grand, often unsubstantiated claims, was a master of corporate theater. Serafina, his intellectual counterpart, was a prodigy of buzzword generation, capable of weaving together jargon into an impenetrable tapestry of what sounded like profound insight but was, in reality, little more than hot air. They were charismatic, articulate, and utterly devoid of the patience and foresight required to build enduring value. Apex Innovations, a company Octavius had once admired for its early pioneering spirit, its solid engineering, had fallen under their sway, its once solid foundation steadily eroded by their myopic vision. They chased fleeting market trends, prioritizing flashy and proven technologies over robust, secure systems, all while proudly proclaiming their disruptive innovation and youth-centric approach. Apex was a microcosm of everything he had come to despise about the modern tech world. It was this creeping disillusionment, coupled with a deep-seated curiosity about the true nature of human character under pressure, that sparked the idea of the disguise. Octavius wanted to understand, from the inside, how quickly integrity could crumble under the weight of ambition, how easily wisdom could be dismissed, and whether genuine kindness could still flourish in such a cutthroat environment. He yearned to test the prevailing narrative that only the young and ruthless could succeed, to see if there was still a place for those who valued depth over dazzle, and empathy over ego. He had spent years observing the industry's hypocrisies, the performative posturing, the endless pursuit of external validation. Now, he intended to dive into the heart of it, unseen and unheard, to gather irrefutable evidence for his own thesis on human nature, specifically on the inverse relationship between hubris and wisdom. The planning for Arthur was meticulous, a project of silent, surgical precision. Octavius, with the help of a few trusted, discreet associates, engineers and data analysts whose loyalty was absolute and whose discretion was legendary, crafted a persona that was intentionally designed to be overlooked. Arthur would be competent, but not flashy, experienced, but not ostentatious. He was given a carefully constructed resume that hinted at a long, stable career in systems architecture, just enough to get him hired at a mid-level position, but not so impressive as to invite intense scrutiny or suspicion. His fictional previous roles were in well-established, slightly staid companies known for their stable infrastructure, not their bleeding-edge innovation, ensuring he'd fit Apex's perception of legacy. His wardrobe was deliberately unremarkable: tweed jackets, simple shirts, sensible shoes, designed to blend into the background, to convey a sense of quiet competence rather than cutting-edge brilliance. His speech was measured, his opinions offered only when directly asked, and always with a deferential tone that belied his true intellect. He even adopted a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his hands, a subtle physical detail meant to reinforce the perception of age and, by extension, a perceived decline in agility. He practiced walking with a slight stoop, a careful slowness in his movements, making himself appear just a little less energetic than the typical Apex employee. During this period of clandestine preparation, Octavius also secretly established Zenith Tech. It was not merely a rival company, it was the antithesis of everything Apex had become. Zenith Tech was built on principles of long-term sustainability, ethical innovation, robust security, and, crucially, a deep respect for all its employees, regardless of age or background. Its core team comprised seasoned veterans who had been dismissed or overlooked by other companies for their age, mixed with bright, ethical young talents who valued genuine innovation over empty hype. It operated in the shadows, its existence known only to Octavius and his core team, quietly developing the very solutions that Apex was so carelessly neglecting. They worked on secure, scalable cloud infrastructure, AI ethical frameworks, and advanced data protection systems, areas Apex treated as afterthoughts. The goal was not just to acquire Apex, but to demonstrate a profound lesson, that true strength lay not in superficial flash, but in fundamental integrity, and that even the most seemingly insignificant individual could hold the keys to an empire's downfall or its salvation. Octavius was not merely planning a hostile takeover, he was orchestrating a grand, ironic play, a demonstration of cosmic justice where the very people who dismissed wisdom for youth would be undone by the wisdom they so scorned. Arthur's arrival at Apex Innovations was, predictably, met with utter indifference. He was a new hire, one of many, quietly processed through HR and assigned a desk in a corner of the sprawling open-plan office, deliberately chosen for its proximity to key network infrastructure. No one noticed his perfectly ordinary, slightly worn briefcase, nor the quiet intensity in his eyes. He was simply Arthur, the senior systems architect, a title that, in Apex's youth-obsessed culture, was code for experienced but probably slow. He spent his first few weeks observing, listening, absorbing the corporate culture, the casual dismissiveness, the constant chatter about disruption and paradigm shifts that amounted to little more than noise. He quietly mapped their network, analyzed their code repositories, and compiled a comprehensive understanding of their underlying systems, all while appearing to be diligently working on mundane tasks. His initial interactions with Julian and Serafina were precisely as Octavius had anticipated. During a routine team meeting, called to discuss Q3 innovation sprints, Arthur, after weeks of quiet observation, gently suggested a fundamental overhaul of Apex's core legacy systems. He spoke of scalability, long-term stability, and the inherent risks of relying on patchwork solutions, illustrating his points with calm, logical arguments and historical examples of similar tech failures. Julian, lounging at the head of the table, stifled a yawn, his attention clearly elsewhere, perhaps on his phone beneath the table. Arthur, with all due respect, he interjected, a dismissive wave of his hand, as if swatting away an annoying fly. He wasn't in the business of maintaining archaic infrastructure. They were agile. They were disruptive. Their focus was on the new AI integration, the one that's going to revolutionize user engagement. His approach, while quaint, simply wasn't aligned with their forward-thinking vision. Serafina nodded vigorously, her eyes fixed on a presentation slide filled with buzzwords like hyperconverged, democratization of data, and blockchain singularity. Exactly, Arthur. They needed speed, iteration, rapid deployment. His overhaul sounded like a 3-year project. They needed results now. Arthur merely nodded, a slight, knowing glint in his eyes. He had offered the warning, and it had been dismissed. The data, however, was already being silently transmitted to Zenith Tech, every word of the meeting, every subtle dismissal, every ignored piece of advice, adding to the growing dossier. Weeks later, Octavius, still in his Arthur guise, discovered a critical vulnerability in Apex's data security protocols. It was a gaping hole, one that could lead to catastrophic breaches, a flaw so fundamental it spoke volumes about the company's rushed development cycles. He compiled a concise, fact-based report, detailing the flaw and proposing immediate, albeit complex, solutions. He presented it to Serafina during a brief, perfunctory one-on-one, a meeting she clearly found a chore. Serafina glanced at the report, barely skimming its contents, her fingers drumming impatiently on her desk. Arthur, this is very detailed, she said, her tone suggesting boredom rather than appreciation, her gaze already drifting to her multi-monitor setup. But honestly, they were so focused on launching the new social media campaign next quarter. Data security was, like, a given, wasn't it? Their users trusted them. This just sounded like old-world paranoia. Let's focus on the fun stuff, the growth drivers, all right? She tossed the report aside, picking up her phone to check a trending hashtag, dismissing the very real threat with a flick of her wrist. Octavius left her office, the unread report lying crumpled on her desk, another piece of evidence for the grand tapestry he was weaving, another example of the short-sightedness that plagued Apex. Zenith Tech, meanwhile, was already developing countermeasures, incorporating Apex's vulnerabilities into their own robust security architecture. The ultimate test of their short-sightedness came during a crucial project deadline. A major client, a global conglomerate, was demanding a highly customized software solution, and Apex was struggling to deliver a stable product. The development team was in disarray, constantly patching bugs, pulling all-nighters, and morale was plummeting. Julian was in a furious panic, pacing his office, blaming everyone from the development team to the catering staff for the missed deadlines and mounting errors. Arthur, after carefully analyzing the problem, which stemmed from a flawed initial architectural design Julian himself had pushed for, proposed a methodical, albeit slightly slower, solution that would ensure robustness and long-term client satisfaction. It would take a little longer, Julian, Arthur had explained calmly, outlining a phased approach, but it would be stable, scalable, and prevent future headaches. Julian exploded, his face turning a mottled red. Longer? Arthur, was he insane? They didn't have longer. They needed this out yesterday. His methodical approach was precisely why they were falling behind. He was slow, Arthur, just too slow for this pace. Find a hack, a shortcut, anything. Just get it done. He slammed his fist on his desk, the sound echoing through the thin walls. Arthur simply nodded, and watched as Julian's team implemented a rushed, hacky fix, a temporary workaround that, as Octavius knew, would inevitably lead to cascading failures down the line, costing the client, and Apex, far more in the long run. Each of these interactions, each dismissal of his wisdom, each embrace of superficiality, fueled Octavius's resolve and provided Zenith Tech with invaluable intelligence, allowing them to anticipate Apex's eventual collapse and prepare their own ascendancy. Amidst this landscape of corporate arrogance and self-serving ambition, Octavius found a stark contrast in Alara Vance, a junior developer at Apex. Alara was everything Julian and Serafina were not: diligent, unassuming, and possessed of a quiet, unshakable integrity. She often wore the same slightly faded sweaters, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, a testament to her focus on work rather than appearance. She was clearly struggling, financially strained by her sick parents' medical bills and the crushing weight of student debt, yet she approached her work with a genuine passion that transcended the meager salary and long hours. She was the kind of engineer Octavius had always valued: curious, persistent, and deeply committed to writing elegant, effective code. Arthur noticed her immediately, not because she stood out with flashy attire or loud proclamations, but because she simply was. She wasn't playing a part, she was genuinely trying to do good work, to learn, to contribute, in a company that largely failed to appreciate her. He observed how she quietly took on extra work, how she stayed late to debug issues, and how she consistently helped her colleagues, even when it meant her own tasks were delayed. One particularly frantic morning, typical of Apex's chaotic environment, Alara, rushing with a stack of documents and a steaming cup of coffee, tripped over a loose cable in the dimly lit corridor, a cable that should have been properly secured. The coffee splashed across her already stained shirt, leaving a dark, spreading mark. She gasped, her face flushing crimson with embarrassment as the nearby employees chuckled or simply averted their gazes, pretending not to see. Julian, striding past, shot her a disdainful look, barely breaking his stride. "Clean that up, Vance," he barked, his voice devoid of any empathy. Arthur, however, quietly walked over. He didn't make a fuss, didn't draw attention. He simply pulled a clean, pressed handkerchief from his pocket, dampening it slightly with a bottle of water he always carried for his tea, and gently handed it to her. "No need to fret, Alara," he said softly, his voice a comforting murmur, a quiet island of compassion in a sea of indifference. "These things happen. Just a minor mishap." He then unobtrusively helped her gather the scattered papers, his actions a stark contrast to the callousness surrounding them. Alara looked at him, surprised, a genuine smile replacing her mortification. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it resonated deeply with her, a silent acknowledgement of her humanity. He observed the gratitude in her eyes, a fleeting moment of connection that was far more valuable than any corporate success. Another evening, long after the last of the go-getters had left for their networking events, Arthur found Alara hunched over her desk, the only light in the vast, empty office coming from her monitor. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, and she looked utterly exhausted, on the verge of tears. She was wrestling with a complex coding problem, a particularly thorny bug in the new AI integration that had stumped even the senior developers, a bug that threatened to derail a critical launch. Octavius knew the solution, of course. It was a common oversight rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of recursion, a problem he had solved countless times in his long career. But he couldn't simply give it to her without revealing his true capabilities, without breaking his persona. Instead, he approached her, feigning a need for a specific file he knew was on her shared drive, a fabricated reason to be near her desk. As he stood beside her, ostensibly searching, he subtly guided her thought process with a few seemingly innocuous questions, almost rhetorical in nature. "Have you considered the recursive loop in the data retrieval, Alara? Sometimes, the simplest solutions are hidden in the most complex assumptions." He then moved on, leaving her to ponder his words, disappearing back to his own desk. A few minutes later, Alara gasped, a quiet exhalation of triumph. He saw her shoulders relax. She had found it. The solution clicked into place. She thought she had discovered it herself, a testament to her own brilliance, unaware of the quiet, unseen hand that had guided her. Arthur, watching from his desk, felt a quiet satisfaction. She had the intellect, she just needed a little nudge, a gentle push in the right direction, not a handout. He saw her genuine passion, her intellectual curiosity, a rare commodity in the cuttied world of Apex, a quality he deeply admired. The final straw for Octavius's test came when a crucial client report, one of Apex's largest accounts, was riddled with errors. The inaccuracies were a direct result of Julian's rushed demands and Serafina's neglect of data integrity. Julian and Serafina, in a fit of panic as the client threatened to pull their business, immediately sought a scapegoat. Alara, despite having only contributed a minor section and having flagged potential data inaccuracies weeks prior to deaf ears, was unfairly blamed. Her attempts to explain, to point out the original warnings she had given, were cut off abruptly. Your lack of attention to detail, Vance, is simply unacceptable. Serafina had snapped, her voice cold and cutting, her face a mask of false outrage. This is a critical error. You were responsible for that section. Alara stood silently, her shoulders slumped, accepting the blame rather than throwing her colleagues under the bus, even though she knew she was being made an example of, a sacrifice to appease the client and save Julian and Serafina's reputations. Octavius observed it all, his heart aching for the young woman, yet also cementing his resolve. He saw her quiet dignity, her unwillingness to resort to the same dishonest tactics as her superiors, her unshakable moral compass. He made a mental note, a profound promise to himself. This was the character he had been searching for, the one truly worthy of his trust and investment. Every piece of information, every observed blunder, every act of callousness by Julian and Serafina, and every quiet act of kindness by Alara, was meticulously documented and fed into Zenith Tech's growing database, building an irrefutable case against Apex, solidifying the narrative of their self-inflicted demise. The emergency board meeting at Apex Innovations was a scene of utter chaos. The opulent boardroom, once a symbol of Apex's perceived success, now felt like a mausoleum, its polished surfaces reflecting only the pallor of desperation. Julian Thorne, his usually composed facade shattered, paced frantically at the head of the table, his carefully styled hair now disheveled, his movements jerky and uncontrolled. Serafina Vance, her face pale and drawn, clutched a tablet displaying plummeting stock prices and devastating market share reports, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The air was thick with the scent of desperation and the acrid tang of blame. Their carefully constructed illusion of success had finally fractured under the weight of their own incompetence. It's the market, he insisted, I tell you. Julian shouted, his voice hoarse, verging on a scream. Unprecedented volatility. And the competition. They're playing dirty. He gestured wildly, as if warding off unseen enemies, his arguments growing increasingly thin and nonsensical. They just needed more time. Their agile methodologies, their youth-centric vision, it was all sound. It was the execution. The old guard, the ones who couldn't keep up. He glared around the room, conveniently forgetting that the only old guard they had was Arthur, whom they had summarily dismissed weeks prior, whose warnings they had so gleefully ignored. The board members shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the thinly veiled attempt to deflect blame. Serafina, meanwhile, scrolled through a news feed, her eyes wide with panic, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Zenith Tech, they're everywhere. Their market penetration is insane. How did they grow so fast, so quietly? They're acquiring everyone. Her voice trailed off, a horrifying realization dawning on her, a chilling recognition of the name that had haunted their recent quarterly reports. Zenith Tech, the mysterious, rapidly ascending tech giant, had been a thorn in Apex's side for months, outmaneuvering them at every turn, seemingly anticipating their every move, snatching up key clients and market share with an unnerving efficiency. Just as Julian was about to launch into another tirade, another desperate attempt to regain control of a narrative spiraling out of his grasp, the boardroom door swung open silently. A collective gasp rippled through the room, a wave of stunned silence following in its wake. Standing framed in the doorway was not a messenger, not a junior executive, but a figure of immense presence. Gone was the unassuming Arthur, the quiet, almost invisible old man. In his place stood Octavius Thorne. He was impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that exuded power and authority, a sharp contrast to Arthur's tweed. His silver hair, no longer disheveled, was perfectly coiffed, catching the light like a halo. His eyes, no longer hidden behind old-fashioned spectacles, held a sharp, knowing intensity, a gaze that seemed to pierce through the very arrogance of Julian and Seraphina. Behind him, two formidable lawyers, their faces impassive and unyielding, stood like sentinels, their briefcases clutched with an air of absolute finality. Julian's jaw dropped, his eyes bulging in disbelief. "Arthur? What is this?" "Security," he stammered, pointing a trembling finger, his voice cracking with a desperate, pathetic plea. Seraphina's face drained of all color, turning ashen, her lips parting in a silent scream of recognition, a dawning horror that froze her in place. The board members, initially confused, began to whisper amongst themselves, a slow, dawning horror spreading across their faces as they recognized the legendary Octavius Thorne, a man whose name was synonymous with innovation and immense wealth, a figure they had only ever seen in financial journals and Forbes lists. Octavius stepped into the room, his stride confident and unhurried, every movement deliberate, controlled. "No need for security, Julian," he said, his voice calm, yet resonating with an authority that Julian had never possessed, a quiet power that filled the room. He was here, not as Arthur, but as Octavius Thorne, founder and CEO of Zenith Tech. He paused, allowing the words to sink in, watching the realization dawn on Julian and Seraphina like a slow-motion catastrophe, their faces contorting from shock to dawning terror. And he was here to finalize the acquisition of Apex Innovations. He gestured to one of his lawyers, who placed a thick document, bound in a stark black cover, on the polished mahogany table. The terms were non-negotiable. Zenith Tech was acquiring Apex for a fraction of its former value, a direct consequence of their unique management strategies, Julian, Seraphina. His gaze fixed on them, cold and unwavering, stripping them bare of their pretenses. They dismissed Arthur for being too old and not agile enough. They ignored his warnings about their legacy systems, their data vulnerabilities, their short-term hacks. They chose flash over substance, hubris over wisdom, believing their own carefully constructed illusions. He then revealed the extent of his operation, the full, devastating scope of his meticulously planned deception. Unbeknownst to them, Arthur was not merely observing, he was meticulously documenting every strategic blunder, every critical oversight, every disregarded warning. The very insights they scorned were relayed in real time to Zenith Tech, allowing them to build a superior, more robust, and infinitely more secure platform, directly leveraging the weaknesses they so proudly embraced. Every dismissed report, every ignored email, every arrogant scoff had been a data point, meticulously collected. He produced a sleek tablet, its screen glowing, displaying a side-by-side comparison of Apex's internal reports and Zenith Tech's parallel development, proving how their dismissal of his old-fashioned advice led directly to their current predicament, a damning visual indictment of their incompetence. The board members gasped, some burying their faces in their hands, others staring with wide, horrified eyes. They saw now how Julian and Seraphina's arrogance had not only cost them their company but had also delivered it directly into the hands of their most formidable rival. Julian stammered, his voice a mere whisper, "But, why? Why go through all this?" Octavius's gaze hardened, a glint of steel in his eyes. "Because he believed in integrity, Julian. Because he believed that true value was built on solid foundations, not on fleeting trends or the dismissal of wisdom. And because he wanted to see if genuine character could still thrive in a world obsessed with superficiality, a world that had forgotten the lessons of patience and foresight. His experiment, as they now saw, yielded profound results." He nodded towards his lawyers. The paperwork was ready. "Sign it, or face bankruptcy and potentially legal action for gross mismanagement that could be traced directly back to their documented decisions, their blatant disregard for corporate duty." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Julian's shuddering breath and Serafina's quiet sob. The mask had fallen, and the true architect of their downfall stood before them, a chilling testament to their own short-sightedness, a mirror reflecting their deepest failures. The fallout from Octavius's grand reveal was swift and utterly devastating for Julian Thorne and Serafina Vance. The board members, their faces a mixture of shock, betrayal, and self-preservation, wasted no time in turning on their former leaders. The acquisition by Zenith Tech proceeded with brutal efficiency, leaving Julian and Serafina utterly disgraced. Their carefully constructed images, built on a foundation of empty promises and ruthless ambition, crumbled in a single, catastrophic moment. The carefully cultivated network of contacts, the sycophantic praise, the media fawning, all vanished overnight. Julian, whose entire identity was wrapped up in his CEO title and the lavish lifestyle it afforded, found himself stripped of everything. His personal wealth, much of it tied directly to Apex stock that was now virtually worthless, evaporated overnight. His sprawling penthouse, his fleet of luxury cars, his exclusive club memberships, all were either seized by creditors or became financially unsustainable. The media, which had once fawned over his disruptive vision, now feasted on his spectacular downfall, painting him as a hubristic fool who had gambled away an empire. He faced investigations from regulatory bodies, accusations of negligent leadership from disgruntled shareholders, and the crushing weight of public humiliation that followed him like a shadow. He was seen wandering the streets, a shadow of his former self, his tailored suits replaced by ill-fitting clothes, his confident swagger replaced by a haunted, shuffling gait, his eyes haunted by the ghost of his former glory. He tried to find other work in the tech industry, desperately clinging to any semblance of his past life, but his name was now synonymous with failure and arrogance, every door remained firmly shut. He became a pariah, whispered about in hushed tones as a cautionary tale. The irony was palpable, the man who had dismissed experience was now, himself, too experienced in failure to be given another chance. Serafina fared no better. Her carefully curated social media presence, once a vibrant tapestry of professional success and aspirational living, became a digital tombstone. Her curated posts, once filled with motivational quotes and industry insights, were now mocked and ridiculed. Her followers, once numerous and adoring, deserted her, replaced by trolls and critics. Companies that had once sought her innovative insights now actively avoided her, her name blacklisted. Her apartment, filled with designer furniture and cutting-edge gadgets, was repossessed, her lifestyle crumbling into dust. She, too, found herself ostracized, her network of powerful contacts vanishing like smoke. Her carefully crafted persona, the one that had allowed her to ascend by dismissing genuine talent, proved to be nothing but a fragile facade, a house of cards collapsing in the wind. The very youth-centric vision she championed had ironically turned against her, as the industry, despite its superficial embrace of youth, still valued success, and she was now irrevocably branded with failure. Both Julian and Serafina were left with nothing but the bitter taste of their own hubris, their grand pronouncements echoing mockingly in the emptiness of their new lives, their empires reduced to dust. While Julian and Serafina tasted the bitter ashes of their own making, Alara Vance experienced a transformation so profound it felt like a dream, a sudden, joyous reversal of fortune. She had been called into Octavius's office shortly after the acquisition was formally announced. She walked in, her heart pounding, her mind racing, half expecting to be dismissed along with the rest of Apex's old guard, to be just another casualty of the corporate purge. But there, sitting across from her, was not the stern Octavius Thorne she had seen at the board meeting, the titan of industry, but a man whose eyes held the same quiet warmth as Arthur's, a knowing kindness that immediately put her at ease. "Alara," Octavius began, his voice gentle, a voice that carried the weight of wisdom but offered the comfort of understanding. He believed they had met before. Though perhaps not in this context. He smiled faintly, a genuine, warm smile, and a wave of understanding washed over Alara. It was Arthur. The kind man who had helped her clean coffee, who had subtly guided her through a coding challenge, who had watched her quietly bear unfair blame, the only person at Apex who had ever shown her true kindness. The realization was dizzying, overwhelming. He had observed her work, her dedication, and her unwavering integrity, Octavius continued, his voice sincere, his gaze steady. Qualities that, regrettably, were in short supply at Apex. Zenith Tech was built on a foundation of true merit and ethical innovation, a place where talent was nurtured, not discarded. And they needed people like her, Alara, people who prioritized substance over showmanship. He then made an offer that stunned her into silence, a gesture of profound generosity that transcended mere employment. He was offering her the position of head of emerging technologies at Zenith Tech. It was a significant role, one that came with substantial responsibility and a commensurate compensation package that reflected her true value, not Apex's paltry offerings. He paused, allowing the weight of the offer to settle, then added, his voice even softer, furthermore, he had taken the liberty of arranging for her parents' outstanding medical bills to be settled in full, and her student loans to be paid off. Consider it a testament to the value he placed on genuine character, on the quiet dignity she had shown. Alara's eyes welled up, tears of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude streaming down her face, blurring the benevolent face of the man before her. She couldn't speak, merely nodding through her sobs, her chest heaving with emotion. She had spent years struggling, making sacrifices, believing that true kindness and hard work often went unrewarded in the corporate jungle, that only the ruthless ascended. Now, a man she had known as Arthur, the unassuming senior architect, had emerged as a titan of industry, rewarding her beyond her wildest dreams, simply for being herself, for embodying the very principles Apex had scorned. It was a dizzying, heart-stopping moment of pure, unadulterated shock and joy, a profound vindication of her quiet integrity. She finally understood that while the world often celebrated the loud and the flashy, it was the quiet integrity that truly shone in the darkest moments, and that sometimes, justice came from the most unexpected places. Months later, Zenith Tech flourished under Octavius Thorne's visionary leadership. The acquisition of Apex Innovations was seamlessly integrated, its valuable patents and infrastructure repurposed and revitalized, shedding the remnants of its past mismanagement like a snake sheds its skin. Zenith Tech became a beacon of ethical innovation, a company where experience was revered, and talent nurtured, regardless of age or background. Alara Vance, now thriving in her role as head of emerging technologies, blossomed. She was empowered, respected, and her ideas were not only heard but actively sought after, driving groundbreaking projects that genuinely impacted the world. The financial burdens that had once weighed her down were gone, replaced by a sense of security and purpose, allowing her to pour her full energy into her work. She often thought of Arthur, the quiet, older man who had been her silent mentor, and understood the profound lesson he had subtly imparted, that kindness, even in the most cynical environments, was never truly wasted, it was an investment that yielded the richest returns. Julian Thorne and Seraphina Vance, however, remained cautionary tales. Their names, once uttered with a mix of envy and admiration, were now synonymous with spectacular failure, their hubris a legend in the tech world. They struggled to find even low-level positions, their reputations permanently tarnished by Octavius's meticulously documented exposé, their past indiscretions forever linked to their names in the digital ether. They were ghosts of their former selves, haunted by the memory of their arrogance and the man they had so readily dismissed. They often saw news articles about Zenith Tech's meteoric rise, and the quiet, impactful work being done by Alara Vance, a stark, painful reminder of the talent they had overlooked and the empire they had so carelessly squandered. The irony was a constant, bitter companion. Octavius, watching Zenith Tech ascend, felt a profound sense of peace. His experiment had confirmed what he had long suspected, that while the world might sometimes appear to reward the superficial and the ruthless, true character is best revealed in the dark. It is in moments of vulnerability, when no one is watching, that genuine empathy and kindness shine brightest. And ultimately, as the fates of Julian, Seraphina, and Alara so powerfully demonstrated, kindness, integrity, and wisdom, though often dismissed or overlooked, always find their reward, often from the most unexpected places, delivering a justice far more profound than any court could render. If you found this story of poetic justice and hidden wisdom compelling, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next tale of irony and transformation. What did you think of Octavius's elaborate plan? Do you believe Julian and Seraphina truly learned their lesson, or are they destined to repeat their mistakes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, we love hearing from you.